All right. So, I mean, at a high level today, and we'll probably recap as people join, but the idea is to share some of our findings and thinking around AI and business intelligence, and maybe more broadly too, like how we see AI getting integrated into apps or the other way around, which we'll talk about too. And chatbots being able to talk to your apps. All we're all going with this. We'll demo some of the things we have built already. So we have a text to SQL feature we'll demo as kind of an early features that we shipped about a year ago. We'll talk about some of the things we want to build next, a little bit about the industry too, and lesson learned along the way.
Indeed. Here's the all-important title slide. Can everybody see that okay?
Freshly baked, mostly over the past 24 hours, right?
Yeah, nothing like the last minute. All right, cool. Well, all right, we'll go ahead and get started here, I reckon. So, quick introductions first off. Max, if you want to go first.
I'll go first. So I'm Max. I'm CEO of Preset, but original creator of Apache Airflow and Superset. I've been working pretty much nonstop on Superset since 2006, 17 maybe. I have a huge passion for building data tools. How people interact with data. Also, like last mile data consumption. I'm more interested in data pipelines, or orchestration, like I was before. So really interested in the data consumption layer. Huge open source advocate. And Evan, I'll pass it over to you.
Cool. And I'm Evan Rusakis. I work in all sorts of capacities here at Preset and in the Superset community. You probably see me making a bunch of noise on the repo and on Slack. I've been with Preset for 6 years next week, as a matter of fact. So happy to be working on both the open source project and working on cool preset stuff as well. So what we're getting into today is Preset's AI Assist offering, which is a natural language to SQL implementation that we've built and been refining over the past many months. I want to show everybody how that works, since that's one of the most common requests we've been hearing for AI applications, although there are many. So we'll go through that. And then we're going to talk about some of the things that are emerging more recently in AI and some of the philosophies around how those apply to BI and how we're planning to build AI features in Superset and Preset in a very scalable and performant way, which leads us to roadmap items, things that are coming both from the Superset community and from Preset. So we'll go into both facets of that. And then we'll leave time for plenty of Q&A. So yeah, bring it.
Yeah,
And
we'll cover, recently I wrote this blog post, AI and BI on the path to full self-driving, which is relevant here, but we'll cover a lot more than what's in the blog post. But the blog post can be interesting for people who want to follow up or go a little bit deeper into what we're going to cover today. The blog link, maybe I'll put in the
yeah,
chat.
actually, I was just going to tell everybody, get your QR code scanner out, and I'll try to be good about pasting the links as we go through. There's a bunch of different little resources as we go through here.
Yeah, sometimes the QR codes are a little bit annoying, so I'll still put the relevant links as we hit them in the
Yep.
chat. So that's
They're in the presenter notes, so just copy paste. Also, I should say that already some questions are coming in the chat, but we will not be able to keep up with the chat very well. So please drop them into the Q&A tab, which you should see in your Zoom controls. And that'll help us stay organized as we get to the
yeah,
end here.
maybe yeah, we'll try to keep up the pace and save like 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A. We're probably going to be able to stay a little longer too if people want to, keep chatting too. Might be able to bring people into more of a forum conversation too, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So first, let's talk a little bit about AI Assist. Max, if you want to kind of...
Yeah. So at a super high level, what it does, and we'll do a demo, so I don't need to linger on this too much, but I think a lot of the industry kind of went there first, right around GPT 3.5, which is what, like almost like a little bit more than 2 years old now. We realized very quickly that LMs were really good at writing SQL. I don't know how much they were trained on it, but somehow they're really good at writing SQL. The holy grail in BI is self-service in a lot of ways, and we felt like it was a good step in that direction. yet it was important to kind of show people what it's doing behind the scene. So yeah, kind of assisting the person who's got a query, but showing a clear trace of what the AI is doing. I think I'll talk about this some more, but if you skip that step of validation and the AI doesn't show you exactly what it's doing, it's pretty dangerous to just be like, write a question, see a chart, make a business decision, and then realize that, the AI didn't use the right table. So there's that. It comes with some pitfalls too, where, well, if you know how to write SQL, then it doesn't help you necessarily all that much. And if you don't know how to write SQL, then you probably need to validate it in some capacity, right? So there's some pitfall. We'll talk more about that in the lessons learned. Let's see, some of the benefits is, writes high quality SQL. You don't have to write, a 30-line query and figure out exactly the join keys and all that stuff. So for people who do write SQL, it's a really amazing shortcut. And then, presumably it helps business users go from like 0 to 80 in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And then I'll talk a little bit more about like why we picked this. I already kind of mentioned that it felt like a really natural place to start. LMs are good at SQL. Oversight is really important, so showing a trace. And then the way we approach it, so we have an entire blog post, which I'll dig out the link, but around like how we build it and how it's architected behind the scene. But we use vector databases, compute, embeddings, do retrieval based on a vector database. There's also potentially like interesting reading material around something I created called Promptimize. That's like a toolkit to be able to evaluate prompts and their accuracy. So anytime we tweak the prompt, or if we want to try AI Assist with the latest GPT version, we're able to run a huge test suite with hundreds of queries based on like 20 different data sets and assess the accuracy. Like, is it 92% accurate? Is it 86% accurate? Promptimize also allows you to see kind of the cost and the duration, how long it takes, the kind of time to interactions and things like that. So we built that to get things right. And then very much the idea is assist, not drive. Like I'll talk about that some more, but I feel like we're kind of level two line assist in the self-driving analogy, and that we need to kind of show people how to do things, but at the same time show a trace. And then I think maybe I'll save that for the learnings too, but we realized that having really clear, good curated schema with really good metadata really helps not only, all forms of intelligence, not only data scientists or analysts or people writing SQL, it helps the AI quite a bit.
So let's take a quick little look at this. This is the fun live demo part. So I am not one of our customer support folks, so I don't do this every day, but we're going to go ahead and give it a go. So the first thing you can do to provide more context to this is to go ahead and select your table schema on the left, and that kind of gives it a prioritized um, guess at what you're trying to query. And I'm just going to go ahead. This is our vehicle sales data, which you've probably seen in the example dashboards built into Superset.
And while you type, maybe I'll say a thing or two about how it works behind the scene. But we vectorize all your data sets periodically, kind of look for the data set structures that are new or have changed. So we put it in a vector database. And the first phase of the RAG process is to figure out which tables are most likely to be helpful to answer this query, to write the query. So on the left, we pretty much will look across your schema, like all the tables that are in the schema. But if you do bring things in context on the left side, it will prioritize or force this part of the context to be available for the AI. So this helps more with if you have like a messy schema with 600 tables. It can help the AI, the retrieval process, to bring things in context on the left here.
Yep. Then you've got a few ways you can run this prompt to generate a new query, append it to the existing SQL editor, stuff like that. There's a dev settings, which get a little more advanced. But let's go ahead and click and see how many motorcycles are sold each year.
Yes, something to note too here is that it's not like a chat-like interface. So it's kind of one prompt, one query. But if you do the append and run, it will kind of keep track of what you prompted before, and what the sequel was and what's the new question, right? So it can be used more as I call it like session type request as opposed to like a one prompt, one sequel.
Right. So there you go. It's pretty straightforward SQL query that generates, but as you can see, it does the aggregations, it does the filtering and group by and all of that stuff. So this is presumably the kind of question that people on your data team that don't know a whole lot about SQL are going to start off with. Just give me some basic stats. And even if the query winds up not perfect, it's a heck of a starting point where they can go and quiz someone more SQL oriented than they are to dial it in a little bit. But the goal is obviously to democratize data access so people that are not data engineers or SQL experts can go ahead and start querying those tables and trying to find the answers they're looking for.
Yeah, I'll talk a little. I see some questions too in the chat, and I'll talk a little bit more about how it's running behind the scenes. So by
Okay.
default, it's not enabled on presets. I believe you go to the database connection and enable the feature on a per database basis. Um, there's also an extra checkbox to say whether you're okay with sharing sample data with OpenAI. So this will take a handful of rows, perhaps some statistics about the different, the distinct values that exist in the column or percentage of null and that kind of stuff. And passes this metadata over in the prompt for the AI to generate the right query. The sample data can be really helpful for the AI. So if we have an example where you say, give me the vehicle sales in Canada, or something like that, and you have a column called country, but it's a 2-letter code, or it's a 3-letter code, or it's in all caps, so capitalized a certain way. The histogram and sample data really helps the AI kind of guess what to do.
Yep. So here's another pretty straightforward one. I'm trying not to date myself here, but a fairly selfish question to see how many of me there are out in the world. And I guess the Evan population is ramping up, which is nice to see. I'll go ahead and put another one in here that I was thinking of last night that's a little bit of kind of a data quality question. What are the most common names? Oops, I should type correctly. That stuff does matter to your model. Um,
So it might do pretty well too with like typos and things like that. Yeah, one of the questions, like how does that work in a messy, extremely large database in an enterprise environment? So of course the AI, like any intelligence, whether it's a data scientist, an analyst, or an AI, will do much better in a curated type setting where you have really clear table names, table description, column names, column description, and if the prompt is written properly, or the semantics kind of match what's inside the tables, it does a good job at retrieving things. But there's clearly some limitations there in schemas or cross schema queries we don't do currently. We could support, but the more context you have to sort through, the harder it is for the AI.
Mm-hmm. So this is one I thought of last night, being honest, and it turned up an interesting answer. I don't know how many boys are actually named Rachel or Mary. That's a little unfortunate if they are. So this is probably a little bit of a data issue with our birth names example data set. I went through and verified that this is in fact the case. There's probably a couple of mislabeled names, which is kind of interesting. It doesn't show up in the dashboard, but here we are digging around in AI Assist and we found an issue. So the thing works. Um,
Do you want to go into like some of the lessons learned
yes.
here too? So at the beginning, I said we picked text to SQL because it's deterministic, right? In some ways, we can evaluate like was the AI successful at answering the query, and in Promptimize, which is our testing framework um, for the prompts in the engine and the AI. Um, we do evaluate whether the data set has the columns that it should have, or whether the number it's coming up with is actually the right query. So that's good. But in some ways, what we also realize, like where accuracy is important, like, how's my business doing, or what's my current, revenue growth year over year. um Call it 70 to 90% accuracy is not sufficient. So that's the last point here in the talking points. But for people to self-serve, for things where you need accuracy, in many cases, like anything short of 100% can create some real problems. So that's a kind of a curse and a blessing, that it has to be accurate, and it's a kind of deterministically accurate and inaccurate. Then I also mentioned, like, large messy databases are challenging to all types of intelligence. Getting the R into RAG, so the retrieval part of, like, what are the tables that might be most useful to this prompt, is challenging. So we do semantic search on that. It does pretty well, but it does not always do perfectly. So I think we're looking to introduce kind of quality ranking score, or usage-based metric, to factor in that ranking algorithm, to make sure that we bring the tables that are not only most semantically matching, but also, like, most reliable, most used, most trustworthy. So some curation can go a long way here. Yeah, it requires up-to-date metadata and context. So here, a feedback loop, being able to go and improve your table description and your column description, will go a long way. In a lot of cases, if the AI does wrong, it's because there's missing kind of tribal knowledge inside the database metadata. And yeah, prompt engineering is kind of important. If you're going to go RAG, you got to get good at that, and you got to apply the scientific method to your RAG process with a really good test set.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay.
Next slide. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
these are the resources we were talking about. These are a couple of blog posts. So if you have, there's a lot of questions pouring in, which are great ones. We'll get to those at the end. And again, if you're posting questions in the chat, please stick them in the Q&A so we can answer them more directly. But uh, these posts, which I don't have the URLs for, I'll paste them in a second.
I'm pasting them
Okay, thank you.
as
Yeah,
you speak.
the first one is a little bit of a video and an explanation of how you can get access to this feature on Preset. And the second one goes very much into depth on how we built the feature using the RAG approach and everything like that.
I should know this, but is it accessible on our free tier?
I believe it's on Pro and Enterprise, and you just have
Yeah,
to opt into it. Somebody, in fact, I'll get ahead of a question. Somebody was asking about privacy and what is sent to the model. And this is an opt-in feature, since a lot of people that might be in healthcare or something like that definitely don't want to be sending example data. So you can turn on or off the sample data within the features config, but you can also just send the schema without data. But in general, yes, you do have to opt into it, or the admin of your preset team will.
Yeah, that's a lesson learned too. I think we'll hit up a little bit later. So the bullet could have been in a previous slide, but there's clear something we learned is that there's a requirement for what I call bring your own LLM. So for people to be able to pick, I want to use your OpenAI API key, which is the default now, or I want you to use my OpenAI API key. Or in other cases, people are like, I have a model trained or fine-tuned in some ways, and I want you to use my model, not any of the models there. So that's definitely a kind of a next step, and top of mind for us.
Yep. And so coming up, I know everybody wants to see what features are coming up. We will get to that. But first, we, as a prerequisite, need to talk about some of the new tools that are available and how we're going to approach these things, and some of the philosophies that we're likely to have, although they're open to debate, about how we're going to approach this, particularly on open source. So let's dive right in.
Yeah, so here I'm going to go quickly through this because it's like super well covered in the blog post, and it's there and available for people to go and read. I want to make sure we have time for everything else, but in the blog post I talk about the full self-driving analogy. There's a lot of super valid parallels to be drawn. If you look at AI and BI, or just in general RAG type application, I feel like we are kind of lane assist to assisted drivers ready to take over type of in the curve, right? So somewhere in the S curve, we are right up there in the middle, where it feels like everything is changing very quickly. what we have learned from the self-driving is, yes, the car can drive itself, but you need a driver with a driver's license sitting, in the main chair with a steering wheel and pedals. If you bring this analogy, on our side, so that means the UX and user interface of the self-driving needs to be happening in a place where you have a driver and you have someone who can be the pilot to the co-pilot driving there. And another thought around this is like Tesla's been able to say self-drive pretty well for a while, but the path to from level 3 to level four is like twice as hard as like 2 to 3. And then as we get further and closer to level five, it's quite possible that things kind of slow down quite a bit as we get closer to the all intelligent AI that can just give you a straight answer. So in the blog post, I talk about how I think what we're going to see is using the same tools as we have. Like the car hasn't changed. There's still a steering wheel. There's still a driver there. It's more intelligent, but we do need someone there with all of the known interfaces and the knowledge that's required to drive a car for the time being and probably for quite a while. So if we were to, if you look at the idea that we might have a new set of tools that does not have dashboard, does not have, an exploration, does not have a SQL ID, it's just ask a question, get a chart, move on with your life. I think there's a trust issue there, and it's going to take a long time for us to get there. It needs to happen on common, known, understood ground. And the blog post I also talk about like how it's important to be able to go into self-driving and off of it. So, if you've driven one of these like self-driving cars, sometimes you're like, hey, I'm on the freeway, I'll just set it up and kind of doze off in some ways. But in other cases, you're like, okay, now I need to take the wheel for whatever reason. There's something happening. So I think this shift on common grounds, like being able to use AI but get off of AI, at will is critically important. And therefore, like the tools that we use today are the tools that should embed AI, as opposed to like a new paradigm, new set of tools is less likely, and at least in this phase.
Yeah. Just pasting a link. There we go.
Let's see, next slide.
Yeah.
I think I talk about RAG. So I think everyone knows what the RAG's all about by now, but I wanted to just kind of put a diagram. I just pasted something here just to show that some of the limitations with RAG. So RAG is the idea that any application or every application needs to figure out its own context. So it's limited first to its context. So say Superset only knows about what's in Superset, right? It doesn't know what's happening in DBT or directly in your data catalog. It might know some of it, but it's limited to its own context. It needs to retrieve the context, package it, and use the LLM as a service, right? So that's been the pattern so far. So I just want to say that so we can get to the next slide. That's about MCP. So MCP, I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with it. It's fairly new. It's a new protocol standard that is out of Anthropic, and then the industry seems to be rallying around. And this really flips. So if you haven't heard about it, I think you're in for a treat. Like, I think since it's been out, I think people have kind of flipped the way they think about things. So by flipping, what I mean is instead of thinking that your app uses the LLM as a service, it's the opposite. It's your LLM now that has access to all your tools and apps to do whatever it needs to do. So that means it's able to fetch context from here. I kind of mutated that diagram on the right, but you can imagine that you're in Claude or you're in GPT, and then you ask a question, you ask GPT to do a certain task or to find a chart about a specific topic. Well, then GPT is able, or Claude is able to call the Superset service on your behalf, impersonate you, and kind of do chain of thoughts across different tools. So it might find a chart in Superset and say, hey, I'm going to go look in the data catalog and data hub where that lives, get some more information. And depending on what it finds, it might get deeper and ask, DBT Cloud, what's up with a certain data set and who's the owner and how it was built. It might call GitHub to get more information around the source code for the particular asset that you're thinking about. So here's really the LLM, and the chatbot is at the center of it all, and it has a collections of service that it can use, and it can chain. You can do a graph of chain of thought or a graph of thoughts around what it finds. It can also take actions, right? So it can say like, hey, I found a few charts in Superset, or I'm going to go ahead and create a handful of charts. Do you want me to put those in a dashboard? So it can fetch context from different places and take actions in different places, which shifts the paradigm, seems like the way to go. Something that's really interesting about it too, that kind of struck me on that first side, is this user authentication part. So when you do use this, and I can probably do a bit of a demo in a minute of something we have, but so when you set it up, the LLM is connecting on your behalf with the role-based access control limitations that you have. So that prevents issues around potential, model training, like model leaking, where you train a model with all of these assets, all of your, superset charts and DBT configuration. It's really hard for the model to stay contained and only stay within the realm of what you should see. So here you'll see in the demo that when, say I ask Claude to tell me if it can find a chart about a specific topic, it will ask like, hey, can I log in to Superset on your behalf? Can I list the charts on Superset on your behalf? I'm about to take this action. Do you allow once or allow forever? And in all their circumstances, the LLM has the same level of access that you have, which is a super great guarantee to have, and fixes a lot of issues when compared to other approach. And then the thing is, like, I think that got announced like less than a month ago, or fairly recently. It's getting a lot of traction conceptually, but it's still, super early and baking. Currently, you have to run my Cloud Desktop, I think, if you want to test this stuff. So that's the way I tested it. And I think eventually there's new standards coming up around how the OAuth handshake and the permission framework is going to work between, say, your corporate overload, what they allow you to do, and then how you do the OAuth handshake with different tools.
Right. So these authenticated tools, give the model much more agency and puts more tools in their toolbox effectively. And this bag of tools that's happening on the open source world is growing day by day. And one of the interesting ones that cropped up quite naturally is a superset MCP. So what this does is effectively ask your API of your running superset the question that's generated by your chat. It acting as a bridge from the LLM to your REST API. And as far as we know, this only works on the Claude desktop. The catch, of course, is that it comes with a very difficult, perhaps, speed bump riddled installation process. And
For now, at least, yeah.
yeah, I think
I
it's
think
going to
like
get a little
it's
better.
probably going to be weeks or months at the max before we see most chatbots doing the proper kind of and like OAuth and shake.
And um, one of the things that Max immediately found upon testing this out is it exposes a lot of API endpoints, including perhaps ones to delete things that it probably shouldn't, stuff like that. So really, I think the approach needs to be much more curated and purpose-built. And
Yeah, so I think the reason why we see these pop up very quickly is that people have built MCP to REST bridge. If you have a rich REST API, it's really easy to kind of do a one for one and expose everything that's in your REST API to the MCP service. Now we feel like we should probably curate, the set of actions and requests that MCP can do. So this very first implementation on Superset is basically exposing the entire REST API, include like delete all charts and things that definitely should not necessarily be in there. So I think if we, as we build a preset one, I think that's the next slide. We're looking to
Mhm.
really curate, a set of data fetching type mechanism and actions that do make sense in the context of an LLM, right? So it's going to be more curated, more streamlined, more intelligible for the LM and the user. I realize
Right.
we're 30 in. I think we got like 5 minutes before or 5, 10 minutes before we get to Q&A. So I think we'll have to blast. We could do a demo. So if people want to see the Super
Yeah.
MCP in action, I have a demo kind of I can do anytime. We can decide to do that during Q&A.
Yeah, I think the key point for this slide is that preset offers multiple superset instances, and theoretically, a preset MCP would be allowed to control the individual workspaces or control your team that could open up a lot of possibilities for various features. So I
Yeah, and
think,
then all the OAuth stuff, it's likely that it's going to be difficult to set up like proper, authentication and authorization oversight. So, on the preset service, it would just work out of the box and be all connected
mhm.
properly or as easy to connect as possible, which in open source might be a little bit more tricky.
Right. And speaking of open source, I know a lot of people here are asking about the open source side of the equation. We've been talking a lot about preset things, but there are a lot of motions happening, unsurprisingly, on the open source side. And I think the overarching theme that I'll ramble on for the next minute or so is that we need to consolidate and get consensus on the architecture of how we approach this, both from a technical architecture standpoint and also sort of a UX pattern finding. Um, the struggle is to, move fast, but also be strategic so we don't paint ourselves into a weird corner with some gigantic maintenance footprint for the coming years. We've got to build proper foundations. So one of these that came up, and if you don't know what a SIP is, it's a superset improvement proposal, and there's an Apache consensus process around all of these. And this first one is all about basically creating chart and dashboard summaries. So, in theory, an LLM could very easily just look at your chart and say what is happening in this chart. What is the trend looking like? What does the data tell us? What's the story behind this data and this dashboard? So this person from Samsung wants to contribute that, and of course, it immediately leads to the question that a lot of people of you, like a lot of you, are asking in the chat, which is, can you use different models? Can you bring your own LLM? And these are things that are being ironed out in that discussion. The next one is about an AI assistant. It's essentially the open source version of what you saw in the preset feature demo, with a couple of key differences. One is that it would be on open source, and two is that it will support at least a few different models out of the box. Um, and three is that it doesn't do all of the vector database type of stuff that we're doing on preset. We're not going to build that infrastructure into Superset in the foreseeable future. So this is a little bit of a more kind of naive version of that natural language.
Or minimalistic, right? It's like what's the
Yeah.
minimum commitment we can make from an architecture standpoint to serve some LM use cases. So there's different approaches. I think what we're realizing in the space is that the design patterns and the UX patterns are still evolving daily and quickly. Um, Same goes for the libraries that we could pick to power all of this too. So it's difficult to figure out, when we make decision for the open source community, we're going to live with those decisions for the foreseeable future for like 2, 5, 10 years. So you got to make sure that we build on the right foundation. And we feel like the foundation is still kind of shifting in a lot of
Mm.
ways. So these discussions is a place we can go to see what everyone is thinking and kind of chime in as to the best way to do this, the most
Yeah, I think one of the biggest open questions that we're kind of debating is what is going to be that bridge between Superset's code base and the LLM. There's things like LangChain, LangGraph, and several others that are appearing by the day. So we need to get consensus on what's going to give us kind of the most flexibility and the minimal maintenance footprint.
Yeah, and do we support all of the different, LLM providers and then bring your own LLM and the different vector database, or are we more opinionated and say like, oh, this is only going to work with, these three LLMs and that one vector database? So those are decisions that are very top of mind now.
Yep, and I'll give you some places to join the community and get involved in this chat at the end here, because I'm sure many of you have opinions on the matter too. So this one is very important to talk about. If you haven't heard of it, there's a re-architecture going on for a lot of Superset in general, both front end and back end, moving toward an extension architecture where the idea is to remove responsibility and code from the core Superset code base and create a whole marketplace and ecosystem of various plugins. You can think of this as analogous to VS Code or, even Chrome, where you could go and basically just grab the URI of an extension, whether it's a Viz plugin or any sort of number formatter or a control for a control panel or you name it, a fancier, shinier button even, and basically hot load that so that either your entire superset instance or just you have access to that extension. And so this is going to really blow open the doors for features and functionality in Superset in general. But a big part of it will be how this plays in with some sort of core LLM access in Superset. And we want to make sure that the interfaces of these plugins have all the proper means of wiring so that they can communicate with each other and communicate with the host model. But in theory, you can do anything with these plugins on either the front end or the back end. So you could wire it up to talk to different LLMs or do all kinds of crazy stuff. This is all very much in the POC phase right now, and you'll be hearing a lot more about it coming soon. And then,
This allows for extensions to become the breeding ground for like new ideas, new pattern, new takes on how to modify and evolve superset, and then there's this like Darwinistic kind of evolutionary thing that can take place within plugins without being a burden, on the core code base, at least until clear winners can emerge from the extension ecosystem.
yeah. So next,
I'll try to do this in 3 minutes.
yeah, let's go through this real quick.
So those are all features that we're looking to bring to preset and or superset. For now, until things settle, it feels like it makes sense to build this as differentiator and preset, and eventually like decide what would contribute back in the form of plugins and extension back to superset. But there's of course the generic chatbot. That's like the generic approach. The chatbot knows about your context, know about all your superset object, your charts, your dashboard, your data set, and the history of queries, the most popular dashboard. It knows all these things and can take you places within the app. It can answer a question, but it can also say, hey, let me open up an exploration session with the right data set and the right metric and already. Next one, global semantic search. It's adding a global search that not only searches through all your object, like full text search type, but it can do semantic search. So that means, if you ask for a metric like ARR, I will know that it's the same as, annualized recurring revenue or things like that. Next one, the chart building. So it's this idea of assisted data exploration. So you pick a data set, and given a data set, we suggest some interesting prompts, or you can write your own prompt. But there from that prompt, it will suggest some charts, and then you can open the chart, then explore, add it to your dashboard. So it's really like a data exploration assistant that is data set centric. Next one here is the general idea of you're in a dashboard. We know what's in the dashboard, which charts already exist, which metrics are in use, which data sets power the dashboard, and then based on that, you ask generic question. We suggest one or many chart, and then you're able to like quickly add it to your dashboard. So this fits. There's kind of two categories. One is like assisting people consuming data. There's assisting people creating assets for other people to consume. So this fits in the second category. Let's see, auto filtering here. You see the AI assist filter at the top left here. It's not super well highlighted here, but instead of like finding the country drop down and scrolling through and finding the country you want to filter on, you can just say, can you filter on this and that, and it will populate your filters. So that's a bit of a quick gain. And there was another one on the previous one, just quickly.
Oh, sure.
So the other one is like describing a chart. So that's like kind of AI interpretation of what this chart is about and the data in the chart. So if you're like, what is going on with my revenue growth trend, it'll be able to provide more context about the metric, the data set, what it tells, and whether it's trending, it's concerning or not, that sort of things.
Right, which is very similar to what we're seeing on that SIP proposal. But despite the blog post I published about, you shouldn't be doing stuff on a fork, I think right now, until we have consensus on how we're going to do this architecturally and open source, We're going to be building these things at preset because we can be opinionated, and you can do that on your fork too. But we need to align on this as a community.
Yeah, public forks are great too, because in some ways, like until the extension framework is fully baked, you can still have a lot of innovation in forks, and people can still, go try a fork, contribute to a fork. So extensions and forks, extensions are more modular and
Yeah.
better, but we have those public forks available today. I encourage people to, publish one or use the ones that exist.
Yeah, and somebody was asking about this. This is one of the questions. Are we going to be able to go from one of these queries to any sort of chart? Here it
Yeah,
is.
yeah. So I think recommended charts in SQL Lab, I think makes a ton of sense. So if you have a large data set with 100 columns, it's hard to suggest charts. But if you have a small result set, say this very a simple query where you have um, time dimension and two metrics, or a time dimension, a time column, a dimension column, a metric column, it's really easy for us to suggest some really helpful chart. We have or kind of hackathon stage on this stuff, but we know that LMs are really good at defining chart semantics and figure out what's the right chart to build given a certain result set. A few more thoughts quickly. So some of the industry stuff that are up in the air, people want to train their own models, use their own model, bring their own model, be able to pick which version of which model they want to use. I think like we're still figuring out how this all works. That's one thing. The UX design patterns are still evolving quickly, right? Did we go chatbot first? Is it more about letting the chatbot talk to your app, or the app, talking to the chatbot with a very targeted or more broad type approach? So I think this is still evolving quickly. And we're starting to realize like the way it's shifting, MCP kind of flips everything, right? Is it here to stay? Is it going to be ready next month? Is everyone going to adopt it? Is it going to be the preferred way to work with things? Keeping an eye on that. And then, architecture, like what is the right kind of architecture that's going to evolve well as things move? As a vector database required, relevant, optional, must have, all these things are still getting defined. And then I think the next slide, I'll talk about some of our kind of hot takes on some of these things. So I think the first one, I already made that point, which is keep the steering wheel and pedals for this, like until we're at level 5, and level 5 might take a while to get there. So I would be very cautious around like tools that are just like ask a question, get an answer, and move on without showing you what it's doing or allowing you to hit the brake pedal and take control of the steering wheel, right? So we're going to see AI in the tools we use every day as opposed to a new paradigm of tools, at least until we're much closer to level 5. I think personally, and we'll have to see how it plays out, but MCP or something like MCP wins the race, which in some ways might call for not an extension event for RAG necessarily, but it will challenge or threatens the relevance of RAG. So far, I think a lot of people I speak with, myself included, were more based in the GPT interface or the Claude interface first, and we copy paste stuff. MCP fixed the copy paste issue, and now it's getting really good at chain of thoughts and using different tools. Let me run a web query. Let me talk to your dbt cloud instance. Let me talk to your preset set of instances. So we're really bullish on that. We think it's largely going in that direction. It does not mean RAG is not relevant, but maybe it squeezes the use cases for RAG to hyper targeted, more micro feature type things.
Yeah, and then I think the rest of this we kind of covered on earlier slides, so we'll mostly skip it. But at least on open source grounds, we really need to find the approaches and packages and techniques that are really going to last for a good while. We need to make good investments here. So extensions are obvious, but there's a lot of other things we're open to. But we don't want to turn Superset into the new LangChain, so we want to kind of leverage these other, more scalable solutions.
And last we look at LangChain, so it seems to be some consensus, at least in the Python world, that LangChain is the prompting toolkit, the right RAG toolkit. Though now there's LangGraph, which is we use LangGraph or LangChain. And then when we worked with it, our experience was that it seems like a really good comprehensive toolkit, but when you try to use it, you're like, oh, this screwdriver doesn't really have the right tip for the thing I'm trying to do. So in some ways, it felt like the toolkit, at least as of 6 months to a year ago, sometimes was more getting in the way than it was useful.
Yeah.
So is there going to be a better new LangChain? Vector databases, we decided to use PG Vector internally because it's convenient, and then we don't have like a huge vector space to search through. So, is a pinecone type of a vector first database required or not? We still don't really know. So, we have to make sure we're not going to make a bunch of decisions and have to support or unroll these decisions in the next 2 or 5 years as the things settle.
Yep. And if you
We
want to
have
get
lessons learned from that. Like we've been picking up pieces from bad architecture decisions, over and over, and backtracking on a lot of stuff.
So if you want to get involved in those decisions and help shape the architecture of all of this, particularly on open source grounds, here's a bunch of links that are in the chat to get involved. And we're at time, so thank you those who are staying on. You're welcome to stay for a little while. We'll keep going into the Q&A stuff. Otherwise, if you have to part ways for another meeting, thanks for joining us. But let's get right into it. So somebody says, where is the AI residing? In the case of Community Edition, is the LLM local or will it connect to a remote LLM? The answer is it is remote, and I think that's going to be the case for most people. But on the community side, it's not even there yet. What we demoed today is, for now, preset only, but the open proposals that are happening in Superset SIPs are very much active and people are looking to get this stuff merged. In fact, there are demos and proofs of concept that are showing that it works. So we just need to find the right way to get it merged so
Yeah,
that
on
we
the on the preset side too, we're talking with customers that want to bring their own LLMs, or not quite ready, or that want to use their API. So something really easy to do is to use your open AI API key, so that preset cannot see the history of what was run, right? It's between you. So even the cost of running that stuff goes on your bill, not ours. So that's an easy thing for us. Now, if you're going to bring your own LLM, I think we just need some sort of like network access to it, and it needs to implement a OpenAI like API or interface. So I think
Yep.
very possible, very easy to do, but at the same time, like if it goes wrong or it's not accurate, we can't introspect it. We can't test against it. So
Yeah, and somebody's asking if they have the ability to change the model. On the preset side, I think it's more demand based. If we have customers that want to do that, we're willing to explore that. But on the open source side of things, that's going to be table stakes. We've got to find a way that people can connect to whatever LLM provider they want. There's new models every day that you might want to leverage or your own. So that's, I think, key for open source is making it kind of highly configurable.
I think for preset, it's an administrator type level thing. We felt like it was the right way to place it. So, the administrator can tell us which particular model they want to use, and we can point to that. And there's a question, should we let the user kind of pick the model? That's definitely what's happening in the chatbots today, right? When you're in GPT, you can switch from which model to which model you want to use. Very possible for us to expose that.
Speaking of things that can connect to, somebody's asking if it will integrate with Snowflake Cortex. I think the simple answer right now is it works with Postgres. Presets AI Assist works with Postgres, BigQuery, and something else. Trying to remember, drawing a blank at the moment.
Snowflake, BigQuery, Postgres. It's easy to add new dialects. We haven't talked about this. One of some of the learnings is like dialects are intricate, and LMs are a little bit confused about SQL dialects, so they need two
Yep,
shots.
we have a customer right now that's asking for Athena support, so we're gonna take a
Yeah, we're
look.
pushing some feature. Actually, we're meeting this week with some folks from the Cortex team around like the different integration points. So if you're interested on that, we could definitely loop you in and follow up as to how this conversation goes with the Snowflake folks.
Somebody's asking, is AI Assist expected with 5.0? The answer is no. We're still settling on how this is going to work, and the 5.0 release candidates are out. If we can make a quick decision here, it's very possible that we get some of this stuff like extensions and or some core LLM integration built into Superset 6.0. I mean, theoretically, it could be in a 5.1, a 5.2, or whatever, but we need to iron out all the kinks and make sure that everybody contributing to Superset aligns here before we get it. 5.0's already kind of halfway out the door.
I must say, like the beauty with open source too is that there are public forks already, and then there's going to be extensions popping up, over the next like 3, 6, 12 months. So it's not because it's not shipping as part of core Superset 6.0 that you can't play with it, use it, validate it, vouch for one fork versus another. So you can still you don't have to wait for Superset 6.0. Like today, you can go to the public for the open PR and play with this stuff on your own.
Yep. Okay. So let's see. We've got several others. I'll try to find a winner here. Um, Somebody's saying, can you create SQL using several different tables? Yes, it does support joins and all of that, but like Superset itself, you've got to do those joins within the same database, or use some kind of query intermediary. Superset does have the Superset metadata base, not metadata database, but the meta database. Um, and that does not support it presets AI assist yet, but it could. But yeah, within Postgres or Snowflake or BigQuery, you can definitely do joins, no problem.
I think what it, like for now to the scope of operation for a single prompt is a schema. I believe you might be able to make schema if you go and say, I'm going to pick these, 3 tables that I want to use that are across schema. I might be able to use it, but generally we assume that the prompt space or the query space is a single schema.
Yep. Somebody's asking when 5.0 is coming out. The release candidate is available on the Superset releases page. Go give it a try. Let's see.
We crafted actually Evan and I crafted some pretty good release notes too on the 5.0.0.rc2.
Yeah.
There's some really good release note highlighting all the features coming up. We'll have another webinar on why you should be excited about 5.0.
Oh, definitely.
There's a lot of really good stuff coming through.
Um, Somebody's asking if AI assistance available. Yes, it is. If you want to hit up our, you have to be on the professional or enterprise plan. If you're not, just hit the
I
contact
think we can
sales.
turn it on. I'm not sure if it's turned on by default during trial, but so when you sign up for a free preset account, you get up to 5 seats. And I think maybe more seats unlimited during a 2 weeks period. And during that 2 weeks period, we can certainly turn on the feature flag so you connect it to your database and you can play with it.
Somebody's asking about the privacy aspects. Is the analysis and data kept private? It's what it does, at least for now, is it sends the schema as the metadata builds a lot of context. So it doesn't actually send any of the data unless you opt into that as a feature. That's up to you. And you are not opted into the feature in general until you decide to turn it on. Because if you have sensitive data, you probably don't want it. And we're going to always default to the secure standpoint.
Yeah, and then we pass this either metadata or metadata plus sample data statistics to like depending on your configuration to our OpenAI API integration API key. We could use your API key, but if you check the sample data box and you have PII, it's not impossible that there would be PII going from your sample data. I think we send like 5 to 10 rows of sample data. Yeah, definitely not impossible that PII would go there. OpenAI on their side, they say they don't train or retain, API call data. So there's some guarantees that's provided by OpenAI there.
Somebody asked an interesting question. Is this helping people to learn more advanced SQL? And
Yes.
I would argue definitely yes. You don't have to know SQL at all to use the feature. And as soon as you type a question, you see at least some approximate SQL of how to answer that. Now, could this
Yeah, I
lead
would say like the two main benefits is like saving time on writing complex SQL, like finding the right table, finding the right columns, actually like writing every single character in your SQL query. Then the next benefit is like a great learning tool to say like, oh, my question translate to that. SQL is very intelligible, so you can learn both about like your own data set and how they're structured, how they should be joined, and you can learn about the SQL mechanics as a language.
Yep, and that can definitely lead to a lot more ideas that follow that line of thought. Like if you want to have a feature that explains in natural language what the query is, you can certainly do that. Or, if somebody's new to SQL, we could get into stuff like SQL autocorrect. All of this stuff is There's a long laundry list of features we'd love to build, so we're trying to find out what our customers and the community are most interested in, tackling them one by one. Let's
If
see.
you think, I'll say something that's kind of new thought just as of now. But if you think about the text to SQL feature as it is, as we demoed today, and you flip it in an MCP context, it can be pretty interesting to think about it that way. So just like trying to go through the thought exercise. So you would be in Claude, and you would say, "Hey, can you write a query, in preset superset that answers this question?" And then the MCP would say, "Okay, let me find the tables that are most useful to that. Let me write some SQL, and here's a link to pop SQL Lab open with that query running, right? And then if it doesn't work, you're in session mode in Claude, and you can say like, oh, I didn't quite write, can you look up, the GitHub configuration of this file, or, do a little bit more work, or explain to me how it works. Like, what are you doing there? Or why are you using this table? So then you could have a much more kind of chatbot-like experience with covering all the features and targets and goals related to text to SQL.
Yep. And then speaking of MCP, somebody's asking, can it read documentation or annotation from other tools like dbt? Um, Ultimately, potentially, I think that's where some of these various MCPs could be inserted. It's up for grabs whether or not that would fit into like a chatbot experience within Superset. We don't want to reinvent Claude as a product, but at the same time, it seems surely possible to leverage these
Yeah, I
things.
mean, today, like the state of the things is I think all of the product companies or, data companies are really excited about MCP. So there is a DBT Cloud, early MCP thing out. I think Cube said Cube.dev is shipping their own. I'm certain, the data dictionary companies are as well. So these are popping out very quickly. The only thing is to get it to work, you need to have Cloud Desktop, and you need to like mess with a terminal and a command line to set it up as it is currently. So that's a bit of a break to adoption. But what we think is like over the next few weeks and months, there's going to be like a good OAuth framework. I think Google actually layered on top of MCP kind of an auth framework that governs all of this, so another layer of middleware. And people are moving extremely fast there. So I think in the next month or two, you're going to be able from GPT and Claude, Cloud, not the desktop, to you know handshake with the services you want to give access to, right? Like connect to my Notion, connect to my GitHub with my account, connect with my DBT cluster, connect with this. And then when you ask question, you can be specific. Like, can you check in Data Hub, what's related to this specific data asset, or you can ask more vague question where it might use do a graph of thought of like, oh, first let me find the right data set in this tool. Now let me write a query in this other tool. So I think that's the most promising type thing because it meshes all that stuff together and essentially can act on your behalf in all the tools that you use every day.
Yeah, I'll attempt to kind of combine three of these questions. Does it give the user any validation or feedback, or does it take feedback from the user if the query is not exactly what you want? Can you dial it in and kind of iterate on that? And will you be able to, refine it, or does it start from scratch each time? And on top of that, does it suggest any performance improvements, or can you suggest performance improvements, things like that? So how do we iterate on these generated queries?
I can probably take some of it, pointing to the blog post, which explains kind of what we did and how it works behind the scenes. So there is things like when it generates before we show you the SQL for you to run, we do actually run it in the backend, make sure it actually computes. And if it does not, we tell the LM to take another stab at it. So there's much more to the graph or chain of thought that's happening in that RAG process. So there's that. I think there's a way that so when you do append and run, there's four options in that menu. If you do append and run, it will add the new query on the previous prompt, and that context is passed to the LLM. So in theory, you can kind of say, like, can you just tweak what I had before? Or if you go and edit the query slightly and say, like, now add this to the thing I edited slightly, it's possible for all this to work. Not sure if I covered everything there.
So, and we're at time, so I'll end with the last question from the Q&A tab, which is the obvious one about timeline. What's the timeline for bring your own LLM? And I think I can safely say that on the open source side of things, that's exactly what we're trying to figure out is how do we build something that's eminently flexible so we can support all of these needs. On the preset side, we are open to this. If you have a particular model that you need to connect to, reach out to your customer support team and we'll discuss.
Yeah, or talk to sales if you're a prospect. I think it's super easy, especially if you have and you should if you have your own model, you should have an OpenAI compatible API endpoint. And for us, instead of pointing to, chat.open or api.openai.com, we'll just point to your thing. We need to make sure that we see each other through the firewalls, but otherwise should just work.
Yep, and we have a test suite to check it. All right.
All right,
Thank
like,
you.
maybe just like closing word too, like we're all super excited to talk about this stuff too, especially like people building or using or finding out things. So, don't hesitate to reach out directly to Evan, myself. We can have follow-up conversation about all these things. It's always fun to talk about this stuff. So looking to engage.
Yep. Thank you all for joining us today. Thanks for the great questions. Appreciate you all, and we'll see you on Slack and email and everywhere else.
All right, thank you all.